Luke passage, Luke chapter 10, is a beautiful passage that I want to tell you a little bit about. One of the things, a young person that asked me what I do all week asked, how do you come up with the Bible passage for the Sunday services? And often there's something called a lectionary. Many of you know that, a calendar of readings that we look to and that is followed throughout the year called the lectionary. And we sometimes follow that. We don't always. We can pick other passages of Scripture if we would like. But Will and I, in preparation for today, looked ahead to what's the lectionary for this Sunday, July 7th. And it was this reading from Luke chapter 10, verses 1 through 11. And we thought, well, that's a perfect text for a mission Sunday. So it's the mission of the 70. Jesus sent out the 70 disciples. And just imagine him sending them out into Baltimore and New York City and places around our country. So listen as I read the Gospel according to St. Luke. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into this harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this house.' And if anyone that is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the laborer deserves to be paid. Do not move about from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you. Cure the sick who are there and say to them, 'The kingdom of God has come near to you.' But whenever you enter a town and they do not welcome you, go out into its streets and say, 'Even the dust of your town that clings to our feet we wipe off and protest against you. Yet know this, the kingdom of God has come near.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. At this time, I'll invite our young people to come in some order. 1, 2, 3 of them are going to share, and then Will will wrap it up for us. Come.
Hello, everyone. My name is Henry Blair. I just graduated from high school, and next year I'll be going to Emory University. So this was my last mission trip with PCMK. On the other hand, it was actually the most impactful of the 3 mission trips I've done. And I don't think it was the work that made this trip so unique. I think it was actually the community of Baltimore and the things we learned there. Baltimore really surprised me, because going into the trip, I had heard that Baltimore was a very poor city and there was a lot of addiction. And when we arrived at the center, I heard even more about why Baltimore has the problems that it does. The people at the center, which is the place that we stayed at, explained a long story of Baltimore's history about discriminatory legislation that still remains today, like, as Dale mentioned, the red line districts, covenants, and so many other things. And I knew all of this going into my first day of work, but despite this, living around these problems completely changed my perspective. Several days on the trip, we worked at Amazing Grace Lutheran Church, and Amazing Grace is located in a very low-income district of Baltimore, and they're fighting a lot of poverty, drugs, famine, gentrification, mostly from Johns Hopkins. And the church was first described to me as a beacon of light because they provide all of these classes for people with addiction. They have like yoga and activities for people to do every day. And miraculously, the church actually managed to stay up and running even though they thought they would close around December. And they're just getting by. And that is actually kind of the epitome of a lot of the communities we were in. People were just getting by. That's normal there. And we worked behind the church in their garden. It was one of the only green spaces in that part of Baltimore. They created that space by taking down 18 vacant homes behind their church and turning it into like a bunch of meadows and a playground. And we were surrounded by poverty, but this was this one little oasis of butterflies and children and birds, and very hot sun. But still, we couldn't overlook the fact that in the back of the garden, behind a bench, there was a woman who laid passed out from her last night's heroin. Our first morning there, I was weeding in that corner, and I didn't even know she was there, and I was talking to my cousin Lily. And then all of a sudden, we heard some muttering, and she's going, "Steve, where are you? You have my bag." And she had no clue what was going on, and she was fumbling to find her clothes, and we turned around to see her scantily clothed, all confused, and she reached out to us and asked us for money. And we could see the track marks up and down her arm, showing her addiction. Later, Steve arrived when we were going to eat lunch, and she actually shot up right in front of us. And we were inside the oasis. What amazes me about that memory is how communities can change so rapidly in Baltimore. And this still goes on today, and there's not a lot that can be done right now. And this is actually a result of racist legislation and a long period of segregation and discriminatory neglect. We learned that in Baltimore, neighborhoods have been designed to actually keep black people living in one region of the city and white people in another. In fact, even today in many contracts, homeowners are only allowed to rent to certain white people. The church that we worked with is actually fighting that. They're buying low-income homes and writing into the contracts that they could be sold to low-income local people to kind of fight all those problems. But experiencing this firsthand made me realize that many of these addicts are not necessarily the criminals that we usually see them as, and rather they're just victims of an unjust society. Another thing this trip made me realize is how fortunate we all are. I've had this feeling after all of my trips, but Baltimore really sent that message home for me. While working at Amazing Grace, the church, I befriended an 8-year-old named Tio. And as I think about his future, it's a little scary for me because I am reminded of a conversation I had with one of the people who was guiding us around Baltimore on our trip. Her name was Mel. And when I asked Mel how they prevented kids from getting into those bad behaviors, she explained to me that there's really nothing they can do except pray and hope. They can offer programs to keep people busy, but there's really not a lot you can do to keep people from getting into that. And here, we're also fortunate to live in a place like this, but these issues exist here too. But it's different because, in my school, like everyone goes to college, and it's a lot harder to move up in the world when you're in an environment that doesn't really care about like social mobility. And when you're surrounded by people who don't care about moving up because they've been forced into that life, it's really difficult for you to change your almost predestined future. This trip helped me realize how I'm just very fortunate to live in this area with such an amazing family. And I would also like to thank Elizabeth, Dale, Will, and Katie for coming on this trip with us. Katie, thank you so much for coming. Your resilience is remarkable. Elizabeth, I've had a wonderful time becoming friends with you over the past few years. You're such an amazing person, and you organize these trips for us, and you love us so much, and that's why we love you too. Dale, you're just like the best. Thank you so much for coming to our church. You and Elizabeth have made PCMK a much better place by just offering mission trips. We didn't have mission trips before they came here. Will, you may be the nicest person I've ever met. You're really positive, and sometimes it's a little scary. I hope to keep seeing you when I come home next year. To all my friends on the mission trip, thank you so much for the good memories. We're always going to be friends. And to the high schoolers who have not done mission trips, I promise you they're life-changing. They've been life-changing for me and my older brothers, my younger brother. And they'll be life-changing if you do them as well. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is RJ. I'm going into my senior year of high school. This past week in Baltimore was a life-changing experience and tremendously changed me. Compared to last year when we were just one group working on one house in one little town, this year we are working beside another group in a large community. Although it was a service trip, it was a major learning experience for all of us. On the first day, we were given a justice tour through Baltimore. It was about an hour long, and we pretty much looped around the city, starting from where we were staying at the center, which is literally in the center of Baltimore. The scenery and infrastructure drastically changed throughout the tour, from neighborhoods with large, inviting, tree-lined row houses to neighborhoods with boarded-up windows, crumbling facades, entirely sprinkled with litter, and not a single flower in sight. Some of these neighborhoods looked like a third-world country. Baltimore is very black and white. Not only am I talking about the race divide, but also just the environments were so polar. At the end of the tour, I saw two things that shocked me and disturbed me. The first thing we all saw was a do not enter sign right outside of a beautiful suburban neighborhood with large houses similar to Westchester. There was a brick wall, and on one side was a beautiful green neighborhood with a newly paved road, and on the other side was a vast urban area that had no trees in sight and an old unpaved road. You were allowed to leave the nice neighborhood, but you could not enter, and it clearly was a two-way road. In other words, the people of the nice neighborhood were saying, keep out. The other thing I saw that hit me hard was this girl in a wheelchair. I saw plenty of homeless people on this trip, but this person stood out the most. As we were making a left turn, I looked out of the window of the van, and we made eye contact. She was thin, young, had blonde hair, crooked teeth, was holding a sign that I couldn't read from 5 feet away, and she was rolling around in the middle of a busy road, desperate for money. My heart was broken, and I did not want to look out the window any longer until we returned to a better area. My biggest takeaway from the trip, besides being immensely more grateful, was that to really believe something, you have to see it yourself. These past few months while prepping for the mission trip, we have been told about the poverty we will encounter in Baltimore. For the past few years, I have learned about the heroin epidemic in the media and in school, but actually seeing dozens of heroin needles and drug paraphernalia on the ground, and watching one lady, like Henry said, about to shoot up, demonstrated that this problem is true and it's real. I remember Mel, one of the leaders of the center, telling us something along the lines of, just because you don't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And she went on explaining how many politicians make decisions only on problems they see directly and put aside others that might be hidden in the background. On the way home, while everyone was asleep, Dale and I had a long conversation about life, religion, and the Bible. One of the most important things we agreed on was the fact that no one chooses the life they enter into. That fact is the basis of why we should be more compassionate and help others who have a disadvantage, like many in Baltimore. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Marvin, and I was one of the youths to go on this life-changing mission trip to Baltimore. First off, I would like to say thank you for all of your support, not only that you gave to the kids and the leaders, but for the trip in general. When I first thought of Baltimore in my head not more than a week ago, I thought of an impoverished city that only held violence and sorrow. And even after a couple days in Baltimore, I was still set in this mindset. It was after our first day working that I finally saw the beauty in Baltimore. It was the little things, like the paveway at Amazing Grace Lutheran Church that had butterflies painted on the ground, or other things like the sense of community as we were constantly greeted and welcomed by the residents in Baltimore. One of my favorite memories of the trip was of when we went to Amazing Grace for service on that Sunday, and during the sign of peace, every single person gave me either a handshake or a hug and made me feel like I had known them my entire life. Even though I could talk for hours about these happy memories, there was still poverty in almost each of these people's lives. Whether it was seeing people using heroin or driving by a disabled lady asking for change at a red light, the city of Baltimore, like many other cities, needed help. As we learned the first day, that help would come through breaking boundaries. Whether those boundaries were physical, like town lines or walls, or if it was mental, like the looks that people would give to those in need. It was our group's job to help break those boundaries, even if it was uncomfortable. As I've told many family members and friends, this has been one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I'm not going to lie, it took some time to get used to, working in some of the hottest neighborhoods in Baltimore and getting sunburned even if you were wearing sunscreen. But it was things like the hug from a young girl named Taylor that I was playing with, and hearing the words "thank you" and "God bless you" that made it all worth it. One of our leaders, Mel, told us the first day that it wasn't our job to completely change Baltimore, but rather understand and learn about how you can help and what you can do in 1 week. Thank you all again for letting me and our entire mission group go on this trip. It's because of you I will remember this as such an amazing learning and working opportunity.
Good morning. My name's Will. I'm the youth director here. I was asked to kind of close out this message time. I like the scripture today, Jesus sending out the 70. I mean, one thing, it just reminds us that he had more than just the disciples. Sometimes in our heads, we get to thinking it's like Jesus and these just 12 guys walking around. But he had at least 70, and probably a lot more, people following him. And he sends them out with these instructions to do ministry. And thinking about it during this past week, it occurred to me that this was a very quiet ministry he was setting them out to do. He said, don't take anything. Don't take your cloak, don't take your bag, don't take your purse, don't take a sword. Just head on out and go into a town. And first person who lets you stay there, and stay there as long as they'll let you stay there. Whatever they give you to eat, eat it, no matter what it is. Any problems that come before you, help them. If people are hurt, heal them. If people need this, do that. And then stay there as long as they'll want you to stay, and then when you're done, move on to the next town. And if a town doesn't want you, that's cool. Just move on. Even like knock the dust off. Like say, hey, no, I'm not even taking the dust with me. Just head on out. Kind of a very quiet ministry. And I saw that a lot when we were down in Baltimore. These ministries that I think seemed relatively quiet. The group that we were with on Sunday went around this neighborhood and hung out these plastic bags with instructions for a food and clothing drive. And then me and a couple of people from our group went back on Tuesday to collect all those bags. And we sorted out the food. And it was going to a couple different places, but the main one is they have in front of their church just these two, they look like those little tiny libraries, if you've seen them. Like you can take a book and leave a book, like just a little, looks like a giant birdhouse with 2 shelves. And every day they would stock that with bags of food. And anyone who wanted could come and take them. No income verification, no identity check. There was nothing like, oh, wait, how many times have you taken food from this today? Or wait, do you really need this? Nothing to make sure they're taking, a balanced meal or specific types of food. Now, we'll make sure you take some vegetables and starch, whatever. It was just, if you want it, take it. It's yours. It's a gift. And it's similar with the garden that some of our young people talked about earlier at Amazing Grace. It was for the community. It was like community property. Anyone could come. Didn't matter who you were, what your problems were, didn't matter why you wanted to come to this green space. You were part of the community. This was your space. And they said that even a lot of the people around would just come randomly and help out. There was a guy next door who would just come randomly and mow because it was his space too. We were working weeding this one section across the street, and the woman next door said, "I'm sorry I'd help, but I'm having this problem with my back, but usually I come and help out with this." These were gifts for everyone. And it reminded me of this book I read I haven't thought about in a long time. It was years and years ago when I was in college. I was taking this philosophy class, and we read this book called The Question of Hugh. And it was basically this account, it was a true story taken from the account of this Jesuit priest who was working in China. And there was some converts, but he was mainly studying these ancient Chinese texts. And he was going back to France, and he took this gentleman named Hugh, who had converted to Christianity and been part of that community, to come help him translate stuff. And basically, they get back to France, and he starts acting insane, to the point where after about 6 months, this priest has had enough and has him committed. But it's interesting because all we have is his perspective. And there's always this question to what extent he's, maybe a crazy person, or maybe he's just eccentric, or is there some kind of cultural misunderstandings going on? So one of the things he wants to do is he wants to wander around the countryside as a beggar and just visit all these places. He wants to go out, you could say, without cup, without sword, purse, without cloak, and just go wander from town to town and depend on the charity of others. The one scene I thought a lot about is at one point this priest takes him to a clothing store and has him kind of outfitted because he was just kind of wearing these old dirty clothes that he had brought over from China, and has him kind of dressed up like an actual civilized French person. And the first thing he does when he leaves is he sees a beggar, and he takes off the clothes and gives them to the beggar. And the guy says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what are you doing? Those were for you. I just bought those for you. Did you not see what I did? And now you're just giving them away? Don't you understand?" And I think on some level, he did understand. He had been given a gift, and a gift is not supposed to have strings attached. And when he saw someone who needed something more than him, he gave it away. Now we know that it really wasn't a gift. He wanted his subordinate to look respectable so it wouldn't reflect poorly on him. But Hugh knew the meaning, I think, in some ways, of ministry, of gift. And that's what I saw all last week. Ministries with no strings attached. We talk a lot, I'm sure you've heard me say this many times, mission's about doing what needs to be done, not what we want to do. Sometimes we have this idea of the work we want to do, but instead we try to go in a spirit of openness with no strings attached. This isn't about what I want, but what about you need. And I think mission is always a little crazy. It's about giving people what they need. And when it's done right, we always find that we get something that we needed too. In that sense, it's a two-way street. And the gifts that we give and the gifts that we get are quiet ministries with no strings attached. And amen.